here's the key question. Okay, so I get frustrated at spin class because if I were to ask the question, what is the movement that you're trying to improve? Now, cardiovascular-wise, if you said, well, if I do spin class, that gives me better cardio, right? And I would say yes. However, if we look at the cardiovascular ability of a cyclist versus the cardiovascular ability of, say, a runner, they're very different. There's actually something called state-specific cardio. And what that means is that state-specific cardio means if you've done a similar movement pattern and achieved a cardiovascular challenge, then that will cross over better than if you've done it in a different sport. Here's a really easy example. Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong is a cyclist. Would we say he's a pretty good cyclist? Hopefully. 7 Tour de France's? Yeah. Let's say on a bad day, maybe he only wins 1. Okay, now, drugs or no drugs, I'm not really going to argue that point. What I'm going to say is that Lance Armstrong, amazing cyclist, went and did a marathon. So he's like done these races where he's racing all day. And he's done it like day after day after day. Probably the best cardiovascular ability on a bike of anyone, especially when you add a few extra red blood cells in there with the drugs he took, right? So then, make him run. Okay, where did he come running? Does anyone know? I think he ran the Boston Marathon. He ran a marathon, doesn't he?
He did the New York
Under
under 3 hours.
3 hours.
He did the 2 hours and 55 minutes.
2 hours and 55 minutes.
But he'd only trained up to 12 miles before he did it.
Sure.
That was his longest run.
Sure. I mean, that was his longest run. I'm going to bet that he was still on the bike 3-4 hours a day. Yeah. So here's the key thing. Is he trained not enough. He said it's the hardest thing I've ever done. And for someone like that to have done all these amazing things, to say it's the hardest thing I've ever done, what does that give us a clear signal of? That what he was training for was not what he was trying to achieve. Right. Similar thing goes when people go cycling. So when people say, I'm doing a bunch of spinning to get ready for this, and then they say, why is it that my legs hurt so bad?
And that's the main thing that bothered him during his marathon, is the pounding.
Oh yeah.
He was so used to being on the bike, not pounding.
Yes. So let's talk about that. So being on a bike. So when I'm on a bike, when running and cycling, let's say when I'm cycling, I've got one leg down and one leg up. Okay, so I've got one leg pushing down while the other leg's getting ready to push. Okay, so and then he comes through and cycles through. So I've got one leg landing while the other leg's up. Similar to running. Okay, let's be very general and say it's similar in that one leg's pushing down or one leg's landing while another one is getting ready to push down. Okay. Now, the biggest difference is that when I'm on a bike, there's no ground. So all this is doing is this is getting ready to come back up. When this foot lands, when that front leg lands, basically the body